On my birthday, my parents went on a trip with my sister and left me behind, without even inviting me. On top of that, they left a list of household chores for me to complete. That was the moment I realized my true worth to them. So, I made a decision that caught them completely off guard. Before the story begins, if you like our channel, subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. And now, we invite you to enjoy a story with an unexpected ending. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Like you were just there to serve, without love, without recognition? I felt that way my whole life. But it was on my birthday that I finally saw the truth. While other girls my age were celebrating with family and friends, I was alone. No cake, no birthday wishes, no gifts. Just a note left on the kitchen table. We took a trip with your sister. Don't forget to clean the house. Chore list is on the fridge. That was when it hit me. I wasn't part of the family. I was just a convenient service for them. But that day, I made the most important decision of my life. A decision that would change everything. My name is Emily. And on that day, I turned 18. A day that was supposed to be special. A milestone in my life. But to my family, it was just another ordinary day. I woke up early, my stomach in knots, hoping for at least a simple, happy birthday when I came downstairs. Instead, I was met with silence. The house was empty. My parents and my sister Sophie were gone. Confused, I walked into the kitchen. There was a hastily written note on the table from my mother. We took a last-minute trip with Sophie. We'll be back in a few days. Don't forget to clean the house. The chore list is on the fridge. My hands trembled as I read it. My eyes filled with tears. Not only had they left me behind without even an invitation, but they also expected me to clean the house while they were gone. Like I was nothing more than a maid, someone unimportant, someone without feelings. A tightness gripped my chest. For years, I had ignored the signs. I had always known my sister was the favorite. Since we were kids, she had been treated like a precious gem, while I was forgotten. But up until that moment, I still held on to the childish hope that, in some way, they cared about me. But that day, all my illusions shattered. The chore list was pinned to the fridge with a magnet. I read each task, feeling the anger rise inside me. Wash the dishes, vacuum the house, change the bed sheets, take care of the garden, go grocery shopping. Not a single word of kindness. Nothing that even hinted that this day meant anything to them. I sat at the table, staring at that note as if it could somehow give me an answer. The silence around me was deafening. My birthday. And I was alone. No cake, no presents, not even a simple, happy birthday. That was the moment I realized my true worth to them. Nothing. I meant nothing. But if they didn't value me, then maybe it was time for me to decide my own worth. That was the moment I made a decision. One they never saw coming. I sat at the table, still holding that note. The lump in my throat tightened. How did I get to this point? How did I become the forgotten daughter, the one always pushed to the background? I closed my eyes, and like a slow-motion film, my mind dragged me back to the past. I remembered being a child, trying in every way to please my parents. I used to draw pictures for my mother, Claire, hoping to see a spark of pride in her eyes. But all I ever got was a forced smile and a half-hearted, "Oh, that's cute, dear," before she set the drawing aside and turned back to her conversation with Sophie. Sophie, my younger sister. The shining star of the family. Since she was little, she was treated like she was made of gold. If Sophie wanted something, she got it. If Sophie made a mistake, she was forgiven. If Sophie spoke, everyone listened. And me? I learned how to be invisible. I remembered a Christmas when I spent weeks making a gift for my mother, a photo album filled with our memories together. On Christmas Eve, I handed it to her, smiling, excited. She flipped through it quickly and said only, "Oh, thank you, Emily." Then Sophie appeared, holding a necklace my dad had bought for her. "Mom, look what Dad got me." And just like that, my mother put my gift down and rushed to hug Sophie. My album sat there, forgotten. It was never opened again. Another memory came to mind, my 12th birthday. I had been looking, forward to it for weeks, hoping for a party, a cake, something special. But at that time, Sophie had just started competing in gymnastics. And guess what? On my birthday, my entire family went to watch her tournament. I spent the day alone at home, again. And when they finally came back, my dad, Richard, tossed a plastic bag onto the table and said, "We got you a present on the way." Inside was a cheap sweater, clearly bought in a hurry, without any thought. Meanwhile, Sophie got a special dinner to celebrate winning second place in her competition. "She needs more attention right now," my mother said. "You understand, don't you, Emily?" I understood. I always understood. I understood that I had never been a priority to them. I understood that my role in that house was simply to exist, to help when needed, and to never ask for anything in return. And now, sitting there, staring at that list of chores on my 18th birthday, I realized something important. They were never going to change. I could spend my entire life trying to carve out a place in their hearts, and it would never be enough. I would never be Sophie. I would never be the perfect daughter in their eyes. So why was I still there? If I disappeared, would it even matter to them? Then another memory surfaced. My grandmother, Margaret, the only person who had ever truly seen me. When I was little, I used to spend weekends with her. Margaret was different from my parents. She listened to what I had to say. She kept my drawings. She taught me how to cook. She told me I was smart, that I mattered. But my parents never liked me being close to her. "Your grandmother has old-fashioned ideas," my mother would say. "She fills your head with nonsense." But was it really nonsense? Maybe my grandmother had been right all along. Maybe the problem had never been me. And maybe it was time to do something for myself, without telling anyone, without asking for permission. I looked at the note one last time. Then, without thinking twice, I clenched it in my fist and crushed it, before tossing it straight into the trash. I had already made my decision. My heart pounded as I climbed the stairs to my room. With every step, the indignation inside me grew. My entire life, I had accepted being ignored, pushed aside, as if my existence were just an insignificant detail. But now, something inside me was screaming. I would no longer be the forgotten daughter. I reached my room and looked around. The walls were covered with childhood photos, but they all had one thing in common. I was alone in every single one. Sophie had entire albums dedicated to her achievements: gymnastics medals, well-planned birthday parties, trips to Disney. I had only solitary snapshots, as if my life were nothing more than a footnote in the family's story. I pulled my suitcase from under the bed and started packing. Clothes, documents, a bit of money I had saved from working part-time at a cafe. I glanced at my closet and realized I didn't have much to take. I was never the kind of person who received expensive gifts or brand-name clothes, so everything fit perfectly into that small suitcase. My hand trembled as I wrote a short, direct note, so different from all the long, emotional letters I had once thought of leaving behind. "I'm not a ghost in this house anymore. I hope Sophie enjoys doing all the housework now. Goodbye." I folded the note and left it on the kitchen table. That was it. I was leaving. I walked down the stairs with purpose, each step feeling like a weight lifting off my shoulders. But before crossing the front door, I took one last look at the house where I had grown up, the table where I had sat alone on my 12th birthday, the couch where I had watched my family celebrate Sophie's victories, the hallway where I had heard my parents say, "You understand, don't you, Emily?" while Sophie was always the one who needed more. No, I had never understood. And now, finally, I didn't have to. I stepped outside without looking back. The fresh air hit me like a shock, and the feeling of freedom sent a shiver through my entire body. But then another reality set in. Where would I go? I didn't have many friends, and the few I did had parents who wouldn't be able to take me in. But there was one person who had always cared about me. My grandmother, Margaret. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. The line rang 3 times before her soft voice answered. Emily? The way she said my name with warmth and concern made my eyes well up with tears. Grandma, can I come to your house? My voice came out shaky. She didn't ask why. She didn't demand an explanation. She simply said, Come, sweetheart, my house has always been your home. And at that moment, I knew I was making the right decision. With my suitcase in hand and a new sense of determination in my chest, I headed to the bus station. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but one thing was certain. For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. The days passed. I was at my grandmother Margaret's house, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. Not just a shadow in the house, not just a convenient helper. My grandmother treated me like someone who mattered. She asked about my dreams, listened to my answers with genuine interest, and made me feel safe. But deep down, I knew that sooner or later, my parents would realize I was gone. And that's exactly what happened. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, my phone started vibrating nonstop. I glanced at the screen and saw my mother's name, Claire. First 1 call, then 2, 3, 4. I ignored them all. Then the messages came. Where are you? This isn't funny, Emily. If you don't answer, we're calling the police. I rolled my eyes. The police? After years of treating me like a stranger in my own home, now they suddenly cared? I waited a little longer before finally replying, I'm fine. Just far away from you. The response came almost instantly. What's gotten into you? How could you just leave like that without telling us? I let out a bitter laugh. Telling them? The same way they had told me they were leaving me behind on my birthday? My mother kept pushing, but I didn't answer again. I knew it was only a matter of time before they showed up in person, and I was right. The next morning, while helping my grandmother prepare breakfast, I heard a car pull up outside. The doorbell rang. My grandmother exchanged a knowing look with me, as if she had expected this all along. I sighed and went to open the door, and there they were. My mother, Claire, and my father, Richard. My mother stood with her arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. My father, as always, wore his cold, unreadable expression. Emily, this has gone too far. Grab your things. We're going home now, my mother ordered, as if I were a stubborn child throwing a tantrum. I laughed. For the first time in my life, I laughed, right in her face. Home? I crossed my arms. You've never made me feel like I had a home. What's changed now? My mother scoffed. Don't be dramatic. You know you've always had everything you needed. Everything I needed? The anger rose in my throat. You mean a roof over my head and food on the table? Because love and respect were never part of the deal. My father finally spoke, his voice firm and impatient. This has gone far enough, Emily. You think you can just walk out without saying anything? Funny. That's exactly what you did to me on my birthday. Silence. My mother looked away. My father had no response. Then my grandmother, who had been watching quietly until now, finally stepped in. Emily isn't going anywhere unless she wants to, she said, her voice calm but unwavering. That was when my mother finally snapped. This is your fault, Mom. You've been filling Emily's head with these ridiculous ideas. My grandmother crossed her arms. Ridiculous ideas. Like the fact that your daughter deserves to be loved and respected? My mother opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. The truth was right there, laid bare in front of them. For the first time, they were being forced to face the reality of how they had treated me all these years. Finally, my mother let out an irritated sigh. You've made your little scene, Emily. Now let's go. I took a deep breath and looked directly at them. No, I'm not going back. My mother's eyes widened. My father's expression darkened. What? My mother looked genuinely shocked. I said I'm not going back, I repeated, my voice steady. I'm tired of being treated like a ghost in that house. Here, I'm heard. Here, I matter. And for the first time, I actually feel good. So no, I won't go back to that life. Not ever. My mother tried to argue again, but my grandmother shut it down. I think everything is clear now. And if you'll excuse us, we have breakfast to finish. And with that, my grandmother simply closed the door in their faces. I stood there for a moment, taking in everything that had just happened. Then something unexpected happened. I smiled. A real smile. A smile of relief. For the first time, I was free. The sound of the door closing echoed inside me like the end of a chapter. I was free. But freedom, I soon realized, also came with challenges. The first few days felt like a dream. My grandmother, Margaret, treated me with a kindness I had never known before. She made me breakfast, talked to me about my feelings, and most importantly, made me feel at home. But reality quickly set in. I needed to build my own future. My grandmother wasn't wealthy. She welcomed me with open arms, but I knew I had to stand on my own so I wouldn't be a burden to her. So I did something I never imagined. I went out looking for a real job. I handed out resumes all over town, and after a few frustrating attempts, I finally got a job as an assistant at a local bookstore. The work was simple, but I loved every second of it. Organizing shelves, helping customers, breathing in the scent of fresh books. It was a world completely different from the house I had grown up in, where I was nothing more than an unappreciated housekeeper. And little by little, I realized something incredible. I was capable. I didn't need my parents. I could support myself. I could make my own choices. For the first time, I was in control of my own life. Days passed, then weeks. My parents tried, calling me a few times, but when they saw I wouldn't answer, they stopped. I thought they had forgotten about me completely. Until, 1 month later, I received an unexpected message. Emily, we need to talk. Your sister is very sad without you. It was my mother, Sophie, the same Sophie who had always had everything. I rolled my eyes. For years, I had been ignored, pushed aside, treated like nothing. And now, because Sophie was sad, I was supposed to come back? I decided not to reply. Then, another message came. Your father and I think you overreacted. We need to settle this as a family. Family. The word felt hollow now. And yet, some part of me still wanted to believe they missed me. So I did something that might have been a mistake. I called back. My mother answered on the second ring. Emily, finally! You put us through so much worry. Spare me, Mom, I replied, already exhausted. You didn't care when you left me alone on my birthday. Why pretend to care now? Silence on the other end. Then she sighed. We just thought you'd understand. Sophie needed some family time. Sophie, always Sophie. I needed a family too, Mom, but I never had one. She didn't respond. Maybe for the first time in her life, she was actually thinking about what I was saying. But then, she said the one thing that made me realize I never should have called. Emily, you've made your point. It's time to come home now. You had your little adventure, but that's enough. My blood ran cold. Had my little adventure? She thought this was just a phase? That leaving was just some rebellious act I'd grow out of? I took a deep breath. Mom, this isn't a game. I'm not having fun. I'm living my life. And no, I'm not coming back. She tried to argue, but I had already heard enough. Without hesitation, I ended the call. That day, I made a decision. I would never reach out to my family again. They had their chance to love me. They didn't take it. In the months that followed, my life flourished. I got a better job, started saving for college, and most importantly, I felt something I had never felt before. Peace. Sophie? She remained the perfect daughter. But from what I heard from distant relatives, she had started feeling the weight of the responsibilities that had always been dumped on me. With me gone, there was no one left to carry her burdens. And my parents? Well, I think they finally realized that this time, I was the one who had left them behind. A year later, on my birthday, I sat at my grandmother's kitchen table. She placed a small cake in front of me, a single candle flickering in the center. "Make a wish, sweetheart," she said with a warm smile. I closed my eyes for a moment, thinking, what could I wish for when I already had everything I needed? I took a deep breath and blew out the candle, without making a wish at all. Because in that moment, I realized that the greatest birthday gift I had ever received was my freedom. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly happy.